called Harmonium, which is actually in the new issue of Plowshares, which is a cool issue. It's edited by this guy named Neil Astley, who runs this thing called Blood Axe Books. So most of the poems are actually from Ireland and England, and some Americans are in there. And I was actually, very happy to have this poem in there. It's called Harmonium. Here's what's different. Bruce, who is now Sheila, won't join a gym because she's still transitioning and can't change clothes in either locker room. She's between two rooms of time, but there's a lot more death since you died. People live for it now. Endless wars in countries that seem like they're being torn out of the book of Earth. Peace is revolutionary. That hasn't changed. But intelligence is less popular. And inspiration, there's no money in it. Some of us have been possessed by a more fearful version of who we are and aim the camera at ourselves to make sure we are living. I can't even say the name or word for what the picture is called, but it begins with self. I can barely recognize us because of something called fashion. Where are the communities of conspiracy? I want to stay changing. Websites, so many websites like Radium. There's a website that consists entirely of lists. Whenever I look at a list with names on it, I think of death and awards. Movies are different since you died. You don't have to go to them anymore. They come through television along with news from another planet similar to this one. The other planet has some of the same names for places. Fukushima, Russia. In one of the Russias, you can't be gay. When you were alive, the best thing about being gay was the poetry and the other arts that came through a gay body. Now all anybody wants to do is get married, which I did, but it was never on a list, a whim. A garden rose out of nowhere in Provincetown. Me and Andrew, Amy took pictures in the sun. I got to read out loud. Queer minds were the best minds of my generation. Queer shoulder to the wheel. And Ginsberg, he died too. But you know that. He's right next to you with his living harmonium, standing at the board with a piece of cosmic chalk in his hand, ready to draw the world all over again. A world Suzanne G. dreamed would hold all the people. If all of this sounds rhetorical and simplistic, it is, because the idea that I live at all is rhetorical and simplistic. But here I am, as I do. I wake forgetting that everything gets lost to a culmination. And so today I held my living closer than I thought it was, and saw two beautiful kids in front of the Chinese takeout draw a line in colored chalk down the whole length of sidewalk between Broadway and Cooper, where I live, switching colors every few feet so it looked like they were pressing a rainbow down into the earth. I don't know what the line is for, or if they'll ever stop it, or if it will ever come again. But I hope it never ends. I hope it's the line keeping the world in the sky. This is called a movie about a homosexual. I was living in Cambridge, which was basically a broad swath of loneliness wrapped around a magnolia tree. Cambridge smelled like coffee and brains, and it was very quiet, like a madman, hanging around. I lived on Linnean Street across from the Brooks drugstore, and the person I talked to most of the time had the job of making sure people didn't park longer in the lot than for the few minutes it took them to walk into the store to buy something and out into the lot to their car again. His name was Cody, and he had a great body and spent his days in the little booth that he dressed up with photographs of the singer Celia Cruz, who was playing most of the time on a boombox he kept between his legs. Cody was a dreamer, and in the notebook that I kept when I lived in Cambridge, the Cody mantra about not knowing what I wanted got written as, Another long afternoon sitting in the booth with another dreamer. So I didn't have very many friends. Cambridge is like a closed bank, lots of money, and you can't get in. Or it's like poetry, because a lot of poets live there, but I didn't know very many of them until I didn't live in Cambridge anymore. And after I didn't live in Cambridge anymore, poets seemed to fall out of the sky like credits at the end of a movie. And because I didn't have very many friends in Cambridge, I needed sex to make it seem as though I was moving forward in my life. I was having anonymous sex at the YMCA and helping a friend of mine in Provincetown come out of the closet over the telephone. Two things joined only by the fact that they were ideas that required quick action. My friend called me a lot, and I would have to keep reminding him that he didn't have to change anything about himself to be the thing that he was becoming, and would eventually be, for every telephone conversation after that, a homosexual. My friend was afraid that if he didn't start acting faggy or over-the-top critical, other homosexuals wouldn't recognize him or take him seriously, and he wouldn't meet anybody or have more sex than he was already having or have anybody to go to the movies with, which is one of the things about being a homosexual that he really liked, that he was really hardwired for, going to the movies with another guy. He had the sex part down, too. He'd already had sex with men, but he didn't think it was enough to make him a homosexual. He was convinced, even though he wasn't really this kind of thinker, that homosexuals had an aesthetic that went along with the sex. Something in italics. What he was looking for was a homosexual mind to go along with the homosexual body. I told him it was all there already, all of a piece. He wanted a mind that thought more about the homosexual than the body of the homosexual. You are opening a door, I said, not acting in a movie in which you play the homosexual. Here, let me help you, I said. Take this answer. Illness as matador. I'm not good around sick people. It's a character flaw. I ask them what they need, but if they aren't clear as day, I miss the signs and don't know what to do. I'm not intuitive. I'm not patient. I'm brutal, like something you pick up and put back down because it's too heavy. I don't know how to behave or make somebody feel any better. I'm not sexy around sickness. I know it's not my job to make them feel better, and I know it's not their job to make me feel better when I'm sick. I always figure that sick people want to be left alone in the bleak terrain of theoretical life, without other people, until life comes back in full company. For me, a sick person is a version of a person, the body-snatched version, which of course isn't true, which is why I'm not good around sick people. My hard wiring in the illness area is sloppy and wrong. I have empathy for people right up until they get sick. Most people get better, and I wait for that to happen. My mother skidded on black ice one morning in the country on her way to work at the Seamless Rubber Company and was almost killed, skipping illness. We can't hold people in the world. There's no notice that we can make. When I get sick, I never surrender to it. I can only feel it as something fighting my body like a matador. Health is the bull. I'll take anything and everything to not feel pain because my recovering alcoholism says I do, and because I say that I have too much to do, which isn't true. Edmund White once said in an interview that writing can make him physically ill. Joyce Carol Oates once said that to write even when you were sick. Elizabeth Hardwick wrote in Sleepless Nights, a book that comes out of a dream when she talks about Billie Holiday, that when you travel, you don't exist, which is how I feel most of the time I get sick. Nobody can see me because I don't know what I am feeling when I'm sick except the sickness. Illness possesses me completely, which may finally be the reason why I'm so bad around sick people. I don't exist. How can you? The forces. He walked for a long time through the East Village until he found the front door, which was the same door many writers had in those days. So hard to open that it seemed like a door that was holding the tenants in. His sort of friend had a studio apartment on the second floor, and he was newly living there among several towers of books and a bed. And on this night, a few people had gathered, all smokers, and there was nothing to eat and nothing to drink but water. The sort of friend had just moved in, but there was a feeling as strong as the sound of the rain beginning to fall that the room would stay like this for a long time, at least until the end of summer, and it was only now just the end of a very long winter. It made him wistful and a little angry, the improvised apartment, which the secondhand smoke only punctuated with vagueness, because this was to be, or so the invitation said, a housewarming. He was early because he lived in the upper lip of Manhattan and had a bad sense of timing. And because it was a housewarming, he made a stop first at the little florist that magically appeared in the darkness, where he bought a thing of flowers, only to arrive, he realized now, at the difficult doorway of somebody's thoughtlessness. His sort of friend might have called it a mild case of frenzy from the day of moving, but there was something obvious and slightly mean about the whole setup, like a joke played on the quiet boy in class who cries whenever he's called upon to read out loud. Somehow the idea of sharing joy about moving into a new apartment was turning into something careless. Not even a candle burned an announcement. But he stayed until the rain stopped, and he scanned the book towers with more than an idle interest because his sort of friend was, after everything, a great reader. It was what attracted him in the first place. He realized that what made him sad was that the original thinking about his sort of friend being a force in the world was pushed away by the new thinking that his sort of friend was just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. He really was a sort. And he let the thought run through his mind a few times, the way it is when a fresh idea invigorates everything, even when the idea is slightly dreadful. And he let it run again when he was climbing down the stairs into the city, blown clean after rain. We always want the forces, don't we? Yeah, well, I'm a traditionalist. I'm a romantic. This is called Swale, and that was the name of the horse. And he does come into poetry occasionally. This is in the new issue of Oxford American. If you know that magazine, it's a really good magazine. It comes out of the South, and it's writing from the South. And I had to tell you something. This was a Facebook status that the woman from Oxford American said, "Can you turn this into a poem?" And I said, "Yeah, well, I guess so," because she said, "I'll publish it," and she did. And this is called Swale. Things happen on Facebook. When things like that happen on Facebook, I'm all about Facebook. Seriously, I mean, it was a really wild thing. So you can turn your statuses into poems. You never know where you find poetry. Swale, it's Derby. It was the 30 years anniversary of his winning the Derby. It's Derby Day, and it's been 30 years since 1984 when I stood in the grandstand at Churchill Downs after betting my last $20 on Swale. That horse I groomed and watched as he pulled away from Wayne Lucas's great filly Althea and won the 110th winning of the race. And 30 years and lots of souls have risen to the upper register of life. And my own life has been made more reachable by what their love did to me. And I read some books and wrote some books and watched performances that moved my thinking. And I've seen the man who gave me horses go home to his mother. And I've seen other horses break down or go home to the grasses of their beginning to make more of their blazing kind. And after it all, I met the love of my life, and when the government turned something over, I foolishly married him, foolishly only because all marriage is foolish, an errand into the maze. And it's Derby Day, and I'm remembering my life in a stable and the ordinary living that got spilled around it. And I've eaten good food in places that had views of the everlasting, and I'm certain I've seen the face of God on more than one occasion, and I've held animals so close to my own body that something in theirs must have passed through mine. But nothing has given me more life than watching that big, black, beautiful, shining soul run through the animal line and past all comprehension into the music of his speed and win that race on the first Saturday in May in the year of forever. Here's to Swale and to others of his kind, creature of my joy and of my sorrow. Thank you. And who is it? In the new issue, And the new issue of Poetry Magazine, on the back, they have little quotes. Kathy, I think it's Kathy Park Hong, has a quote that says the commemorative poem is dead. I think something to that effect. Well, that's a commemorative poem. Sorry, Kathy, I actually agree with that. But and of all the things I have to tell you, of everything that's ever happened to me in my entire life, that is still the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. To watch a horse that you have taken care of win the Kentucky Derby. Who knew? Seriously, and I'm not a horse person. I followed a boyfriend to the racetrack. Instead of the circus, I went to the racetrack. I was a broken down drunk in love with a guy whose father trained horses. The year of the wood horse. This is, I was told by someone who sees more stars than I do, the year of the wood horse, which means I am lost in the same stars I was in when I first fell under them. Some night that held the first rocket of light about living and made me plain as born. The planets are in the same place they were then. The news is the same news it was in 1954, except that now it just includes more people and weaponry and less of everything else. This is the year of the wood horse, which means I have to do something important with the pen I've only been lightly dipping into the inkwell of wishes that blinking turns into ashes. I have to make the words fly like sparks from the iron wheel I imagine every soul must bear if they live long enough for stars to slip back into all their first white dresses. How much light from 1954 will it take to find me again in my own homelessness? I'm going to read two more. Do I have enough time? Yeah, enough time, right? This is called Winter Solstice. I should know more about the sun. My husband ran down all the stories this morning. A Saturday we stayed in bed, the day of the shortest day of the year. He told me about the vernal equinox and the solstices, which made me think of the word soul sister and Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, the whole title of the book that almost fits inside the one word solstice, which means the sun stands still, a word as beautiful as what it means, like Merton's breakdown of Truro, which he called a name as lonely as the edge of the sea. We've seen it. Our cottage sits there where we can both watch the loneliness move, the tides, into the height of summer. There's a scene in Almodovar's movie Matador, I think it's Matador, where a line of people on the horizon are letting the full eclipse of the sun happen to them. Now there's a story about the sun I've always known, always believed. The story about how all the minutes fall through time, when the sun crosses with the power of something that feels like it's keeping you on Earth by letting you see it. And I will leave you, one of the things that this book is really about and consciously about is art and the other arts. And there's a lot about the theater in this book and music. I'm a real theater person, but I walk out a lot because I get really bored. But I try. I begin. And there's this fantastic thing, though, that I think was last year called The Last Two People on Earth, which was a wonderful performance artist named Taylor Mack and Mandy Patinkin, who I'm sure you all know, Mandy Patinkin. And this is about that. It's called A Review. We went to see the last, and I will close you with this, and thank you all for coming. We went to see The Last Two People on Earth the other night. It was playing at the Abrams Art Center at the very end of Grand Street, and it appeared like a mirage on an airfield. The last two people on Earth are Mandy Patinkin and Taylor Mack. It's a vaudeville act. What else could the last two people on Earth be but a vaudeville act? My grandfather was in vaudeville. He made the song When the Red, Red Robin Comes Bob-Bob-Bobbing Along famous. It was the first song my mother taught me, and I had to sing it on command whenever she got lonely and missed her father, which happened most of the time when she was driving badly. Something about the past made it happen for my mother in a car. In The Last Two People on Earth, messengers Patinkin and Taylor sing each other's songs and opt for singing more than talking, which is a way of saying the conversation ended when the world did. The songs had to do with what they remembered about being alive, joyfully, woefully, and it was political theater too, critical of America. It reminded me of Brecht. It was good to see that political thinking, real political thinking, which has to do with engaging ideas and resistance, had survived the flood. The men grew to love each other through a series of songs, which is why they didn't have to say anything. Love is an action, like singing. The songs in the Vaudeville Act were written by people like Randy Newman, Peter Allen, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Paul Simon, REM, and Stephen Sondheim. There's a beautifully rendered song by Patty Griffin called Making Pies. The Last Two People on Earth was one of those works of art that did the wondrous thing of folding a great sadness into another happiness, which felt, after hearing every song, the way of making certain we would remember it. Here were the last songs anybody would ever sing. And as Mandy and Taylor paddled away in their inflatable raft, aimed at the heartbroken vaudeville horizon, their last song together was Row, Row, Row Your Boat, which we all know ends with the truest line ever written about life on Earth. It's a dream. Thanks.